So I just watched a woman slowly, methodically, and very enjoyably destroy her boss on a deserted island, and honestly, cathartic doesn't even begin to cover it. Welcome back to Mildly Overreacting. Today we're talking about Send Help, Sam Raimi's survival horror thriller from early 2026, starring Rachel McAdams and Dylan O'Brien. Let's get into it. So real quick, the concept alone is what got me through the doors on this one. A corporate employee and her insufferable boss are the only survivors of a plane crash and end up stranded together on a deserted island. That's it. That's the pitch. I remember seeing the first pitch and thinking, I genuinely cannot tell if this is going to be a horror movie, a dark comedy, a workplace satire, or some unhinged combination of all three. Turns out, yes. The answer is yes. It is all of these things, and sometimes within the same scene. And that's both the movie's greatest strengths and, at certain points, the things that kind of trip it up a bit. But we'll get there. So here's the setup without spoiling too much. Linda Liddle, played by McAdams, is a corporate strategist who's just been grinding at this financial company for years. She's been promised a promotion. She earned a promotion. And then Bradley Preston, played by Dylan O'Brien, swoops in as the new CEO and gives the position to some fraternity brother instead. Classic, I know. So Linda's already in a very specific kind of miserable where she's one passive-aggressive email away from a breakdown. Kinda like how I feel at work right now. So the company books them on a business trip and their plane goes down. She and Bradley are the only ones who make it. And now they're stranded together on an island with nothing. And suddenly the corporate hierarchy that Bradley has based his entire personality on is just gone. It's kinda beautiful. That's the engine of this whole film. We got this guy who's never had to actually work for anything in his entire life. Never had to survive, never had to prove himself in any way that really matters. And then you got Linda, who turns out to be a survival enthusiast. She knows what she's doing. She can build a shelter, she can find food, she can manage the situation, and Bradley cannot. And watching that power shift happen in real time is generally satisfying in a way that I wasn't even prepared for going into it. Let's talk about the acting first, because honestly, that's the thing that this movie does the best. Rachel McAdams in this film is actually really good. Like, I knew she was a good actor already, obviously, but I think she's doing something very specific here that I think is easy to underestimate if you're not paying attention. Linda is not a straightforward hero. She's prickly, she's sharp, she has edges. She's the type of person who's very easy to overlook and very dangerous to underestimate. And McAdams plays on both of those things at the same time, without ever really overdoing it. There's this controlled intensity that she brings to every scene that really makes you believe in what she's doing, even when those things that she's doing start to become a little morally complicated. Through most of the beginning and middle of the film, she doesn't really dip into the full villain territory, but she also doesn't stay in the hero territory either. And watching her navigate that line generally makes for one of the most impressive performances I've seen so far this year. And then there's Dylan O'Brien as Bradley. Let me tell you about Bradley Preston. Bradley is the kind of guy who absolutely refers to himself as a visionary. Bradley has the energy of somebody who's never once in his life been told the word no, and has built his entire self-image around that fact. He's clueless and entitled, and honestly, I don't even think he knows how entitled he really is. And O'Brien plays him with this perfectly calibrated spinelessness that I don't want to say it makes you want to watch him suffer, but it also doesn't make you not want to watch him suffer. He's irritating in the exact way the film needs him to be, but he's also weirdly watchable. There's something almost pitiful about him once the island strips away everything that he's ever used to define himself. And O'Brien finds those small moments without ever letting Bradley fully off the hook. It's a really good performance. The two of them have this chemistry that's less about warmth and more about friction, and the film leans into this very hard. The power shifts between them feel very earned because both actors are doing the work scene by scene. You feel every time the balance tips. And speaking of these power shifts, that's probably my favorite thing about this whole movie. The way Raimi constructs these dynamics is generally clever. There's this rhythm to it where you think you know who has the upper hand, and then something changes. And then it changes again. And the movie keeps you slightly off balance the whole time. Not in a confusing way. In a I don't really know where this is going kind of way, but I love it. And Raimi's so good at building this tension. This is a man who's been scaring and unraveling people for decades, and it shows. He knows exactly when to hold a shot a little bit too long, when to cut at the wrong moment, when to let the silence sit and get uncomfortable. There are scenes in this film where nothing particularly dramatic is happening on paper. Two people talking, two people eating, two people watching each other from across the beach, and somehow they're more tense than some of the action sequences I've watched recently. The cinematography helps a lot with it. There's wide shots that make the characters look tiny and trapped, and then there's close-ups that almost feel too intimate. It's the kind of visual storytelling that communicates pressure without anyone having to say a word. The Danny Elfman score is doing a lot of heavy lifting too. It's got this unsettling quality that keeps you slightly on edge even during the quieter stretches, like the music knows something that you don't, which usually it does. Now let's be real about where the movie loses me a bit, because it does a few times. There's a stretch in the second act where the film is clearly trying to juggle all of the tones at once, the dark comedy, the horror, the workplace satire, and it always doesn't land clearly. Some of the genre switches feel a bit jerky, like they'll build up this incredible tension and then puncture it with a joke, which works maybe about 70% of the time, but the other 30%, the rhythm gets a little too choppy, and you're left figuring out how you're supposed to be feeling. Some of the plot machinations, particularly towards the middle of the film, are a bit convoluted. Not to the point where it loses you entirely, but there are moments where the story is working a little too hard to get characters into certain positions. At a certain point, you notice the screenplay turning some gears that didn't need to be quite so visible. It's not enough to derail the film, don't get me wrong, but it does interrupt the flow at times. And a movie that's running mostly on momentum can feel that kind of thing. The supporting characters from the pre-island section also don't really stick. They're functional, they set up the workplace dynamics, and they make you understand the world that Linda is trying to escape, but they're pretty thin, which is fine. The film isn't really interested in them for long, but it does mean the first act has to work a bit harder to establish emotional stakes when the people around Linda are like archetypes more than actual people. And honestly, some parts of the resolution feel a bit convenient. The film earns most of it, and the climax is generally satisfying in a darkly funny kind of way, but there's a beat or two where things click into place a little too nicely. Here's the thing about Send Help though, even when it stumbles, it's interesting. It's not a film that fails for being lazy or generic. When it gets weird, it commits to the weird. When it's funny, it's actually funny. Not in a, well, they tried, but in a generally burst out laughing type of way. When it's unsettling, it's actually unsettling. Raimi hasn't lost anything. His instinct for timing, his visual horror, or that specific kind of gleeful darkness that runs through all of his best work, it's all there. This is very much a Sam Raimi movie, and if you've liked his movies before, there's a lot for you here. And it's doing something real underneath all the genre stuff. The whole premise is basically what would happen if the artificial power structures that we operate under, corporate hierarchy, gender dynamics, class, all get stripped away, and people have to face what they actually are. Bradley, without his title, is just a guy you can't start a fire. It's generally interesting, and the film explores this in a way without being preachy about it. It's embedded in the action, in the way that people treat each other, in the small choices that they make when nobody's watching. Just good writing. So should you watch Send Help? I think if the premise appeals to you at all, if you saw the trailer and felt even a flicker of interest, then yeah, absolutely. It's not a perfect film. Some of it didn't fully land for me personally, but it's a legitimately compelling watch with two fantastic performances, and a director who clearly still has something to prove, which is ironically the kind of point that this whole movie's trying to make. For me, this movie was 3.5 out of 5 stars. It's a good time, but maybe don't watch it right before a work trip. Alright, that's the review. If you've seen Send Help, I generally want to know what you thought about it in the comments below. And if you haven't, let me know what movie I should talk about next. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you're new. And that's all I have for you in this one.